My family told me it was just a small favor. Watch the house feed the dogs. We'll be back in a week. They didn't invite me on their Christmas trip, but they trusted me to keep their world running. So I turned off my phone, booked a 5-star resort in Aspen, and let karma do the rest. When the pipes burst, when the headlines read, "Denver home floods while family away." They called me over and over. I just smiled and poured another glass of wine. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, don't forget to hit subscribe, smash like button, and tell us in the comments where you're tuning in from. Snow fell in slow, silent sheets over Denver that morning, softening the sound of traffic and turning the world outside my window into something almost gentle. Inside my apartment, the air smelled like coffee and pine. My 2 dogs, Baxter and Luna, were curled under the Christmas tree, the golden lights flickering across their fur. The hum of my laptop filled the quiet as I adjusted my headset and glanced at the marketing slides on my screen. "Okay, team," I said, my voice steady, the tone of someone who'd been running meetings long enough to fake holiday enthusiasm. "Let's make sure the Holiday Escape campaign goes live by noon. Remember, we're selling the Fantasy Family Warmth piece? Let's make people feel like their lives could look like the brochure." Laughter came through the speaker. Someone joked about how none of us had time for family warmth. I smiled more out of politeness than humor. When the call ended, I stretched back in my chair and rubbed my temples. Another holiday season, another reminder that I knew how to sell joy better than I knew how to feel it. I stood and poured myself another cup of coffee, the mug warm in my hands. Outside, a group of kids were building a snowman, their scarves bright against the gray morning. For a second, I let myself imagine being one of them. Carefree, loud, uncomplicated. The fantasy faded fast when my phone began to vibrate across the table. The screen lit up with one word, "Mom." I stared at it for a few seconds before answering. "Hey, Mom." "Hi, sweetheart." Her voice came through cheerful and soft, the practiced kind of warmth she used when there was a favor hidden behind it. "Are you staying warm up there? Trying to—" I said. "It's beautiful, though. The city looks like a snow globe." "That's nice," she replied, distracted. I could hear dishes clinking in the background, and my sister Eleanor's voice faintly saying something about packing. "Listen, honey, we've got something exciting planned this year. The whole family is going to Snow Pine Cabin for Christmas. You remember that place your dad loves? The one with the big fireplace and the view of the mountains?" I smiled a little, even felt a flutter of hope. "That sounds great. Should I bring anything?" "Oh well," she said, her tone shifting almost imperceptibly. "About that, we were actually hoping you could help us out with something important. Baxter and Luna aren't good with kennels, right? And you know Harper's dogs don't mix well with others. So we thought, maybe, you could stay here and take care of them. Keep the house warm, water, the plants, maybe collect the mail." The warmth drained out of my chest. "You want me to stay here while everyone else goes to the cabin?" "It's just for a few days, honey. You love your quiet time anyway, don't you? You've been working so hard, and I thought you might enjoy some peace. Besides, you're so responsible. No one takes care of things like you do." In the background, I could hear Eleanor laughing about something, her voice bright and carefree. "Tell Liv she can have my leftover cookies," she shouted. I swallowed. "Yeah, sure. I can do that."
"Oh, wonderful."
Mom sighed in relief, as if we'd solved a major problem. "You're the best, sweetheart. We'll leave early on the 22nd, so just come by that morning. I'll text you the alarm code later. And remember, don't forget to jiggle the thermostat in the guest room if it gets too cold." "Got it." "You're such a blessing," she added. "I don't know what we'd do without you." "Yeah," I said quietly. "Me neither." When the call ended, I just sat there for a while, phone in hand, the soft hum of the heater filling the silence. Baxter stretched and patted over, resting his head on my knee. I scratched behind his ears, trying to ignore the sting behind my eyes. Love in my family always came wrapped in chores. I looked around my apartment, the tree I'd decorated alone, the wrapped gifts I'd bought for them, the little details I added every year, hoping someone would notice. They never did. And yet, every December, I found myself waiting for the moment they might. That evening, I bundled up, leashed the dogs, and stepped into the frozen air. Snow crunched beneath my boots as we walked through the neighborhood, the glow from the store windows spilling onto the sidewalk. A couple passed by, laughing, hands, intertwined faces red from the cold. Somewhere down the block, someone was singing "Silent Night." I tugged my scarf tighter around my neck, the wool scratching against my skin. Baxter barked at a snowplow rumbling past, and I laughed softly. "Relax, buddy. It's just a truck." We walked past a bakery window where a family was gathered, kids pressing their noses against the glass as the baker handed out gingerbread cookies. The warmth inside looked almost unreal from out here, like something from one of my ads, too perfect to be real life. I stood there a moment too long. The cold bit at my fingers, and Luna nudged me, impatient to keep moving. I took a deep breath and started walking again. By the time we got home, the city had gone quiet, the kind of hush that only happens when snow keeps falling. I toed off my boots, poured a small glass of red wine, and sat by the window while the dogs settled at my feet. Somewhere in the distance, a siren wailed, and then faded away. I looked at my phone on the coffee table. Still no messages, except the one from Mom that said, "Thanks again, sweetheart. We really appreciate you." I almost laughed. Appreciation. That word had become her way of saying, do the thing we don't want to do. The wine tasted bitter, or maybe that was just me. I leaned my head back and closed my eyes, the lights from the tree flickering across the ceiling. For the first time that day, I let myself admit it. I wasn't invited. I was convenient. Outside, the snow kept falling, and for a moment I thought maybe it was trying to cover everything. The noise, the disappointment, the small familiar ache that came from being the reliable one. I opened my eyes, watched the flakes drift past the glass, and whispered to no one. "Merry Christmas, I guess." The city lights blurred behind the frost on the window, and I sat there until the room went completely quiet. The next evening, the snow had thickened into glittering sheets, coating the streets and rooftops of suburban Aurora like icing on a cake. My windshield wipers dragged back and forth, squeaking rhythmically as I turned down my parents' street. Every house was glowing. Icicle lights, inflatable Santa's red bows on mailboxes. It was the kind of neighborhood that tried too hard to look happy. My parents' house stood out even more, wrapped in golden lights, a blow-up reindeer wobbling on the lawn. Smoke curled lazily from the chimney, and through the front window I could already see movement. My mother arranging a platter, my sister Eleanor laughing at something, and my cousin Hannah filming herself in front of the Christmas tree. I parked at the curb, grabbed the bottle of wine I'd bought, and took a deep breath before stepping into the cold. Baxter and Luna had stayed home spared from the chaos I was walking into. The smell of pine and roasted turkey hit me the second I opened the door. "Olivia." My mother called out from the kitchen, her voice cheerful but tight. "You made it." "Hey, Mom," I said, brushing snow off my coat. "I brought wine." Before I could set it down, Hannah appeared with her phone pointed directly at me. "Guys, look who finally showed up, the career woman herself," she said, smiling into the camera. "And empty-handed as usual?" I smiled tightly. "The wine's in my hand." "Hannah." She laughed and flipped her hair. "Oh, right, I meant metaphorically. You know, single, no kids, but she brings the wine, classic Aunt Liv." My mother called from the kitchen. "Hannah, don't tease your cousin." But she was smiling. They always were when the joke was on me. I placed the bottle on the counter. "It's a Cabernet. I thought it might go well with dinner." "Oh, lovely," Mom said, hugging me briefly. Her perfume smelled like nutmeg and control. "We were just talking about the trip. You came at the perfect time." "Trip?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. Eleanor looked up from her phone. "The cabin, remember? We leave on the 22nd. The kids are dying to see snow." "Snow." I looked out the window at the already white lawn. "Seems like you've got plenty right here." Eleanor giggled, ignoring the edge in my voice. "Not real snow. Cabin snow." They launched into a lively conversation about slopes, grocery lists, and matching pajamas for their kids. I stood near the counter, half listening, as I poured myself a small glass of wine. No one made eye contact, so I said. After a pause, "I'm guessing you've already booked everything." Mom wiped her hands on a towel, not looking at me. "Yes, dear. Harper found a great deal through a friend of a friend. It's perfect. 3 bedrooms, a fireplace, even a game room for the kids." I took a sip of wine. 3 bedrooms. She smiled. "It'll be cozy." I set the glass down. "And I'm staying where exactly?" Eleanor stopped scrolling. "Oh, Mom didn't tell you. You're not coming this time. You're watching the house and the dogs, remember?" The room went silent for a moment, but no one seemed to notice how quiet it really was. Watching the house, I repeated slowly. "Well, someone has to." Mom said lightly, "The dogs know you. You're the only one they listen to," Eleanor added. "Plus, you hate crowds. You said that last year." "I said I hate being ignored in crowds." I corrected. "Not the same thing." They laughed softly, the kind of laughter people use to smooth over guilt. Hannah turned her camera toward herself again, whispering to her followers about holiday chaos. I looked at my mother. So to be clear, you've all been planning this for weeks, and you didn't think to tell me until now. Mom tilted her head the way she always did when she wanted to sound reasonable. We didn't want to bother you, sweetheart. You're always so busy with work. We thought this would be easier. Easier, I repeated. Her eyes softened just enough to sell the illusion. You're so dependable, Olivia. You always make things run smoothly. It's a gift. Dependable. That word landed like a stone. I turned to the window, the reflection of the golden light stretching across the glass. Outside, the snow was still falling. Inside, my family carried on their voices rising and falling around me like static. Mom reached out, touching my arm. I know you understand. I looked down at her hand, then back up. Sure, I understand. I picked up my coat. Eleanor blinked. Where are you going? Dinner's almost ready. I just remembered I have work to finish. On a Sunday, she asked. Apparently, I'm the only one who likes staying home, I said. Mom sighed, disappointed in that familiar theatrical way. You don't have to make a scene. I'm not, I said calmly. You already did. I set my wine glass in the sink, grabbed my keys, and walked toward the door. Behind me, I could hear them resume talking laughter, picking up again louder than before, as if to fill the empty space I left behind. The cold hit me like a wave when I stepped outside. The air was sharp and clean, the streetlights glowing halos through the falling snow. I stood on the sidewalk for a moment, watching my breath cloud in front of me, trying to shake the numbness from my chest. Through the window, I saw my family gathered around the table. Eleanor's hands waving as she talked Hannah, angling her camera for a perfect shot, my mother smiling proud of her glittering display of togetherness. Not one of them noticed I was gone. The car started with a soft rumble. I sat there, hands gripping the steering wheel, watching the snowflakes blur against the windshield. I'd been left out so many times before that it almost felt normal. Almost. But tonight something in me shifted, not anger exactly, not yet, but a quiet, stubborn pulse that said, this time don't just accept it. I shifted into drive and pulled away from the curb, the golden lights shrinking in my rearview mirror until they were nothing more than a blur. The highway was nearly empty. Just me, the snow, and the hum of the tires cutting through the silence. The radio played old Christmas carols. Familiar voices singing about home and forgiveness, words that used to mean something before they became background noise. Headlights flickered on the ice-slick road, and I gripped the steering wheel tighter, feeling that strange stillness that comes after anger fades and clarity begins. I'd told myself I was just driving to clear my head, but really I was running from the kind of exhaustion that doesn't come from work. My family's voices still echoed in my head, Eleanor laughing Mom's careful guilt, Hannah's camera clicking like a metronome for my patience. Outside, snow fell heavier, swirling under the glow of the streetlights. I slowed as the tires slid slightly on a patch of black ice. The world beyond the windshield was ghostly white, the lines on the road disappearing into nothing. Somewhere between the hum of the heater and the rhythm of the wipers, the past crept in. I was 25, dressed in my one good blazer, ready for an interview at a design firm downtown. I remember the exact moment my phone rang. Mom's voice panicked. Eleanor's sick, Olivia. I can't leave work. Can you pick her up from school? I should have said no. I should have gone to that interview. Instead, I turned the car around, drove across town, and spent the rest of the day spoon-feeding soup to my teenage sister, who spent half the time texting her boyfriend. When I told Mom about the missed opportunity, she said, "There will be others, sweetheart. Family comes first. There weren't others." The memory faded, replaced by another 2015. I was sitting at my kitchen table, the one I still own, a stack of bills spread out in front of me. Dad had called earlier that night, voice low, embarrassed. "We just need a little help, Liv. Your mother's worried about the credit card debt." I'd been saving for my own place back then, a dream that vanished the second I wrote that check. $8,000. Mom sent a thank you card a week later, with a post-it that said, "You're our rock." I laughed bitterly at that one. And then 2020, the pandemic year. Everyone else in my family was posting pictures of cozy quarantine time, baking bread, doing puzzles, smiling in matching pajamas. I was in my apartment at 11:45 p.m. on Christmas Eve, answering emails from my boss and listening to the dogs snore. Eleanor called me on FaceTime just for a second to show off her kids opening gifts. "We miss you," she said as if I'd been invited. The call lasted 37 seconds. I'd been there for every crisis, every favor, every emotional rescue. But when I needed support, when I was laid off for 3 months that year, no one called, not once. The light ahead turned red. I eased the car to a stop, the snow crackling under my tires. The red glow spilled across the dashboard, across my hands, across the exhaustion etched into my reflection in the mirror. For a second, I just stared at myself. I looked tired, yes, but underneath that, awake. In the passenger seat, a stack of company mail sat waiting to be sorted tomorrow. On top was a Christmas card from Everbright. The words glittered in gold. "May this Christmas bring you peace." I let out a sharp laugh. "Peace," I said out loud. "Right." The light turned green. I didn't move right away. The car behind me honked, snapping me out of it. I pressed the gas and whispered, "Maybe this year it will." By the time I pulled into my building's parking lot, it was close to midnight. The snow had stopped, leaving everything quiet and unreal. I parked, grabbed my coat tighter around me, and walked through the crunching frost to my door. Inside, warmth and the smell of pine greeted me. Baxter trotted up, first tail wagging. Luna followed, stretching and yawning. "Hey, babies," I said softly, kneeling down to pet them both. Their warmth against my hands steadied me in a way nothing else did. I fed them, poured myself some tea instead of wine, and sat down on the couch. The Christmas lights glowed faintly from the tree I'd put up alone. I turned off the TV and just listened to the hum of the heater. The little sounds of life that belonged to me, and no one else. I reached for the notebook on the coffee table, a simple black one I used for work ideas, and opened to a blank page. The pen hovered for a second before I wrote at the top in neat block letters, "Christmas plan. Mine only." Underneath, I started a list. Take the week off work. No guilt. Do something unexpected. Stop waiting for their permission. I looked at the words until they blurred a little. Baxter rested his head on my knee. Luna curled by my feet, sighing deeply. I ran my fingers through their fur and exhaled, feeling the weight in my chest shift. For years, I'd been the helper, the dependable one, the one who never said no. Somewhere along the way, I'd mistaken being needed for being loved. Not this year. I leaned back, closed my eyes, and let the silence settle over me like a blanket. For the first time, it didn't feel lonely. It felt open, like a door cracking toward something new. Outside, the wind picked up again, brushing against the windows, whispering softly through the glass. Baxter stirred his tail, thumping once against the couch. "Yeah," I murmured. "I think you'll like what's coming." The clock ticked toward midnight, and somewhere faintly church bells began to ring. I turned off the lamp and sat there in the glow of the tree, watching the shadows move. I'd spent my entire life being the one who stayed behind. This time, I was going to be the one who left. The morning air was sharp enough to sting my cheeks, the kind of cold that woke you up, whether you wanted it to or not. Baxter tugged at his leash, eager to nose through the snow piled along the sidewalks, while Luna trotted behind me, her breath puffing out in little clouds. The neighborhood was quiet, except for the scraping sound of a shovel a few houses down. Nancy Moore was outside again, bundled in a heavy coat and a knit hat pulled low, clearing her walkway with slow, steady movements. She'd been the neighborhood's unofficial guardian since I moved in 5 years ago, retired police chief, 2 grown sons who barely called, and a sharpness that didn't dull with age. "Morning, Olivia." She called, leaning on her shovel. "You look like someone who'd rather be anywhere but here." I smiled faintly, adjusting my scarf. I'm just doing my rounds. Apparently I've got the best stay-at-home face in town." Nancy chuckled, her breath visible in the air. "That's not a compliment, you know." I figured. She motioned for me to come over, so I tied Baxter and Luna to the fence and climbed the icy steps to her porch. She handed me a mug of coffee before I could protest. "You look like you could use this." "Thanks," I said, wrapping my hands around the cup. The steam rose between us, catching the weak morning light, so she said, settling into her rocking chair. "What's the story this year?" "You're usually knee-deep in work right before the holidays. What's got you out walking the block before breakfast?" I hesitated, watching my dogs paw at the snow below. "My family's going to a cabin in the mountains for Christmas." "That sounds nice," she said, though her tone suggested she already sensed the problem. "They didn't invite me." I added the words flat. They asked me to stay behind and house sit, said I'm the only one they trust. Nancy's eyebrows lifted. Ah, that old line. I looked at her. You've heard it before, sweetheart. I lived it, she said with a low laugh. My ex-husband used to say the same thing about his business trips. You're the only one I trust to keep things together while I'm gone. What he meant was, you're the only one I know won't complain. I smiled, small and sad. That sounds familiar? Nancy rocked back her chair, creaking against the wood. You remind me of myself 30 years ago. Always the fixer, the helper, the one who fills the cracks, so no one else has to. I used to think that made me a good person, I admitted. Lately it just makes me tired. She nodded knowingly. There's a difference between kindness and servitude. Took me half a lifetime to learn it. I took a sip of coffee, the bitter warmth grounding me. The air smelled faintly of pine and cold metal. Nancy's gaze softened. You know people like your family. They don't change because you argue. They change because one day you stop showing up. That's when they notice. I let her words settle heavy and true. So you're saying I should just not do it? I'm saying, she said gently, that sometimes the best way to teach people how to treat you is to stop accepting how they do. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The snow fell again light and slow, the kind that melted on your coat before you could brush it away. I've been the dependable one my whole life, I said finally. It's kind of terrifying to imagine what happens if I'm not. Nancy smiled, the lines around her eyes deepening. Then it's probably the right move. When I stood to leave, she squeezed my hand. Don't let them guilt you out of your own holiday, Olivia. You deserve one too. I nodded, throat tight. Thanks, Nancy, for the coffee and the advice. Anytime. Just don't make me come over there on Christmas morning to find you baking cookies for people who forgot to invite you. I laughed softly. I'll do my best. Baxter barked as soon as I reached the sidewalk again, as if to remind me the world was still moving. Luna wagged her tail, snow clinging to her fur. We walked the long way home through quiet streets lined with wreaths and twinkling lights. Every house looked like it belonged to a storybook family, none of them mine. By the time I got back to my apartment, the sun had climbed higher, turning the snow into glitter. I kicked off my boots and hung the leashes by the door. The apartment was silent except for the ticking of the wall clock. I set the empty coffee mug on the counter, opened my laptop, and checked my email. The top message was from my family's group chat, a thread of photos showing off the cabin. Snow Pine Lodge looked like something out of a postcard. Massive fireplace, wooden beams. A family selfie with everyone smiling wrapped in matching sweaters. At the bottom was a message from Mom. Can't wait for the trip. Love you all, all. I scrolled through the names listed in the chat. Everyone except me. Not even a token. Thanks again, Liv. This time. Just silence. My cursor hovered over the reply button, but I didn't type anything. What was there to say? Congratulations on your perfect Christmas. Don't worry, I'll feed your dogs and guard your house like a loyal servant. I closed the laptop and stood there for a moment breathing. The room felt too quiet, the air too still. Then, almost without thinking, I opened the browser again and typed Christmas destination last-minute deals. The page loaded with pictures of beaches, mountains, city lights. My eyes caught one photo in particular, a luxury resort in Aspen. The caption read, Aspen Ridge Resort, limited availability. The image showed a lodge surrounded by snow-covered pines, the sky washed in sunset gold. It looked peaceful, secluded, untouched by obligation. My finger hovered over the trackpad, and for the first time that week I smiled. If they needed someone to watch the house, they'd have to figure it out on their own this year. I closed the laptop halfway, letting the screen's light fade into the room's quiet glow. Somewhere outside, church bells chimed the hour, and Baxter barked softly in his sleep. For the first time, the idea of disappearing didn't feel selfish. It felt like freedom waiting to happen. The next morning, my phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Group chat notifications lit up the screen one after another. Eleanor posting a video of the cabin buried in snow. Hannah sharing a picture of a perfect table setting she found on Pinterest, captions full of hearts and exclamation points. Mom added her own message. We're so excited. It's going to be magical. Olivia, remember to come by early the day we leave. Baxter and Luna love you the most. I stared at the message for a long time before typing back. I can hire a professional pet sitter. It'll be safer, and you don't have to worry about me juggling work. Her reply came almost instantly. No, absolutely not. You know I don't like strangers in the house. You're the only one I trust, sweetheart. I put the phone down and exhaled slowly. Trust. In our family, that word didn't mean faith. It meant obligation. At work that day, the office had the easy buzz of pre-holiday energy. Someone was passing around sugar cookies, and the interns were arguing about the best Christmas movie. I smiled when they looked my way, but my mind was elsewhere. Janet, the new analyst, stopped by my desk. You're not heading out of town. Not this year, I said, glancing at my computer. Big family plans. Something like that, I said dryly. I've got responsibilities. She nodded clearly, sensing the wall I'd built around the subject. Well, if you change your mind, we're having a potluck Christmas Eve. You'd be welcome. Thanks, I said, meaning it, even if I knew I wouldn't go. By noon, I'd plowed through my emails, approved 2 ad placements, and half-watched the clock. When 5 finally came, I grabbed my bag and drove home through streets lined with twinkling lights. My apartment was quiet warm. I set my laptop on the counter, fed Baxter and Luna, and started moving through the apartment like someone preparing to leave. I didn't really think about it. I just moved. I folded my clothes neatly into a small suitcase, the kind I hadn't used in years except for work trips. Heavy sweaters, jeans, my thickest coat. I took down my passport from the drawer even though I wouldn't need it. Old habits die hard. In the corner of my dresser sat a stack of envelopes, train tickets I'd bought for my family 2 years ago for a surprise reunion that never happened. I'd kept them out of habit, maybe as proof of effort. I slid the stack into the top drawer, shut it softly, and whispered to no one. Not this time. On the counter, my phone buzzed again. Mom had sent a list of things to double-check before the trip. Alarm codes, thermostat settings, reminders about the mail. Every line of the message read like a job description, not a request. I typed out one reply, got it, and deleted it. Instead, I opened a new message to Nancy. Hey, I might go away for a few days. If anyone asks, just say I'm fine. The dogs are with me, she replied 2 minutes later. Good. Don't tell them where. Just go, I smiled. Leave it to a retired cop to understand the art of strategic silence. The dogs watched as I zipped up my suitcase. Baxter tilted his head curious, while Luna's tail thumped softly against the floor. You two ready for an adventure? I asked. Baxter barked once like he understood. I packed their leashes, a few toys, and their food. The sight of the bags stacked by the door sent a rush of something through me. Not guilt, not exactly, but the dizzy lightness of disobedience. That night, I poured myself a glass of wine and sat on the couch. The city outside shimmered festive and distant. My phone buzzed again, the family group chat still alive and loud. Eleanor had sent a voice note about which cookies she was baking for the kids. Hannah posted another photo of the cabin's fireplace with the caption, "Can't wait for our cozy family Christmas." Mom chimed in, "It's going to be wonderful. We'll finally all be together. All." I stared at that word again. It meant everyone except me. I clicked into the chat details and scrolled through the list of names. Eleanor, Hannah, Mom, Dad, even Harper's husband and his parents. But no Olivia. It was almost funny in a cruel, predictable way. My thumb hovered over the chat for a long moment. Then I tapped, Leave Group. The confirmation popped up. Are you sure you want to leave this conversation? Yes. The screen went blank. No more notifications. No more proof of where I didn't belong. I put the phone face down on the table, let the silence expand around me. Baxter stretched out on the rug, snoring softly. Luna climbed onto the couch beside me, pressing her warm body against my leg. I guess it's just us, I murmured. I turned off the TV, leaving only the glow of the Christmas tree and the quiet hum of the city outside. For years I'd believed that peace had to be earned, by being good, by being useful, by saying yes. But peace, I was starting to realize, didn't ask for permission. Before heading to bed, I opened my laptop one last time. The browser still had my last search open. Aspen Ridge Resort. Limited availability. The image of the snow-covered lodge glowed on the screen, warm light spilling from its windows. I stared at it for a long while, then clicked. Book now. The confirmation email arrived seconds later. Your reservation at Aspen Ridge Resort is confirmed. The dog stirred as I turned off the light. My phone, silent now, stayed dark on the table. No goodbyes, no explanations. Just quiet, and for the first time in years, the quiet felt like mine. The morning sky was a pale, washed-out gray, the kind of cold that seeped through gloves, no matter how thick they were. December 22nd. Snow blanketed every roof on my parents' street, the air still except for the distant scrape of a shovel somewhere down the block. Their driveway was a blur of motion, suitcases, duffel bags, coolers, and a tangle of excited voices echoing into the crisp air. "Eleanor, don't forget the gingerbread box," Mom called, her voice sharp, even through the muffling snow. Eleanor slammed the trunk of her SUV. "Got it. I already packed it next to the gifts. Make sure you get pictures of the cabin right when you arrive," Mom added, waving her gloved hand. "Hannah needs them for her blog post. Something about family tradition." I stood at the edge of the driveway, bundled in a thick coat, hands buried in my pockets. I wasn't supposed to be there long, just long enough to collect the spare house key and smile for appearance's sake. "Morning," I said evenly. Mom turned, her face brightening with that mix of love and command that defined her. "Oh, Olivia, good. We were just talking about you. You'll come by later to start the house check, right? The dogs are in the den." "Yeah," I said. "I'll swing by this afternoon." Dad waved from the driver's seat of their SUV, already running the heater. "Be careful on the roads, Liv. It's slick out there." "I will." Mom walked closer, brushing snow off her coat. "I know you'll take care of everything. You always do." She reached out, squeezed my arm like it was both thanks and reassurance. "I can always count on you." That word again, count on, dependable, predictable. The invisible role I'd mastered without ever auditioning for it. I forced a polite smile. "Have fun. Send pictures." "Of course," Eleanor chirped, sliding into her car. "We'll think of you every time we light the fire." "Gee, thanks," I murmured. They drove off in a line of cheerful chaos. Mom's SUV first, then Eleanor's, the sound of tires crunching over ice fading until there was only the hush of falling snow again. For a moment, I stood there in the empty driveway staring at the faint tracks their cars left behind. Then I exhaled a puff of white breath in the air and turned toward the house. Inside, the warmth hit immediately. The Christmas lights blinked softly on the mantel, reflecting off the polished hardwood floors. The dogs, Harper and Finn, came running, nails clicking against the floor tails, wagging like they hadn't seen me in years. "Hey, troublemakers," I said, crouching to ruffle their fur. "Guess it's just us now." They barked and circled me, excited, oblivious to the quiet that settled after the laughter and footsteps faded. I poured them water, filled their bowls, then wandered through the rooms. Everything was exactly the same as always. The smell of cinnamon candles, the porcelain nativity scene on the piano, the framed photo of the whole family smiling at last year's Christmas brunch. I was behind the camera in that photo. I usually was. I ran a hand over the back of the couch, tracing the familiar grooves in the fabric. The house felt staged, beautiful, cozy, and utterly impersonal. I turned on the gas fireplace, the faint hiss followed by a low, steady flame. Soft jazz began playing from the speaker. Mom's holiday mix. The sound filled the space, but it only made the emptiness louder. I took out my phone, snapped a few photos of the dogs lounging by the fire, and sent them to Mom with a quick message. "House looks great. Harper and Finn are happy." The reply came within seconds. "You're a lifesaver. Always knew I could trust you the most. Have fun relaxing." I stared at the words. The screen's glow reflected off the window, lighting my face against the pale morning outside. Trust again. It didn't mean respect. It meant convenience. I locked the door behind me when I left the sound of the latch clicking like punctuation. The snow had started again, fine and glittering, clinging to my coat as I walked to my car. Back at my apartment, the city looked different. Quieter, softer, like the world was pausing for something. I brushed the snow off my boots, fed Baxter and Luna, and poured myself a mug of coffee. The smell filled the small kitchen as I opened my laptop. The tab was already open, the one I'd left up last night. Aspen Ridge Resort. The images scrolled past, pine trees dusted with snow, wooden lodges with warm amber lights, a frozen lake catching the sun. My cursor hovered over the booking form. Name check-in, date room preference. My hands moved on their own. Olivia Grant. December 23rd. 1 guest. I hesitated for only a second when I reached contact number. I left it blank. Then I clicked confirm reservation. The sound of the email notification came a moment later, a clean digital chime. The subject line read, "Your stay at Aspen Ridge Resort is confirmed." For a long time I didn't move. The only sound was the low hum of the heater and the dogs breathing softly nearby. On the screen, the confirmation page glowed softly in the dim apartment. The reflection of it lit my face, turning the room into a blur of warm gold and cold blue. I leaned back in my chair and whispered, "I used to think I needed to be invited." The sentence hung in the quiet like frost on glass. Now I said, "I think I just need to show up for myself." Outside, the wind picked up, carrying the faint jingle of a bell from somewhere down the street. Baxter lifted his head, ears twitching, and Luna pressed closer to my chair. I closed the laptop, finished my coffee, and let the silence settle around us. Tomorrow, they'd be halfway to the mountains, snapping photos in front of that perfect cabin. They'd think of me for a second, probably say something like, "I hope Olivia remembered to water the plants," and I'd be gone miles away finally somewhere no one expected me to stay behind. The clock ticked softly in the corner, marking the start of a different kind of holiday. The bus hissed to a stop, brakes squealing against the snow-packed road. Morning light spilled across the valley, catching the white peaks that surrounded Aspen like a crown. I stepped down with my suitcase in hand, the air crisp and clean in my lungs. The snow fell in slow, delicate flakes, dusting my hair and coat. For the first time in a long while, the silence didn't feel empty. It felt earned. The driver gave me a polite nod before pulling away, leaving me standing at the edge of a postcard. Rows of pine trees heavy with snow. The faint scent of wood smoke curling through the cold. I adjusted my scarf and started toward the lodge. Aspen Ridge Resort rose ahead of me, all warm timber and wide windows glowing with firelight. When I pushed through the heavy glass doors, the smell of cinnamon and pine hit me first, followed by a wave of heat from the massive stone fireplace in the lobby. Couples huddled near the fire families shuffled in puffy jackets, and a few travelers lingered by the check-in desk with cups of cocoa in hand. Behind the counter stood a woman with short silver hair and kind eyes. "Welcome to Aspen Ridge," she said with a genuine smile. Her name tag read, "Catherine Ross, General Manager. You made it just before the next snowstorm hits. You must have been traveling a while." "Since dawn," I said, brushing snow from my sleeves. "I'm just glad to be here." "Well, you picked the right place," she said, typing something into her computer. "Here people come to forget the noise of the world for a few days. Phones barely ring up here. You'll see." "That's exactly why I came," I said, meeting her smile. She handed me a brass keycard tucked into a leather holder. "Room 4 to 12, top floor. Mountain view. Breakfast starts at 7, and if you need anything, my staff's around 24 hours. Thank you, Catherine." I took the elevator up the soft instrumental Christmas music humming faintly through the speakers. The doors opened to a hallway lined with framed photos of snow-covered ridges and ski trails. My boots squeaked against the floor as I walked to my room. Inside the suite was everything I hadn't realized I'd needed. Warm amber light, a fireplace flickering quietly, and a balcony that looked out over a valley blanketed in untouched snow. The bed was enormous, the kind that made you forget alarms existed. I unbuttoned my coat, kicked off my boots, and set my bag by the chair. The quiet hit me in layers. No barking, no constant buzzing of texts, no expectations pressing in. I sat in the armchair by the window and watched the snow fall against the glass, each flake catching the light before melting away. I didn't check my phone. I didn't want to. By early afternoon, I'd found my rhythm again. The kind that belonged only to me. I walked the resort's winding path, camera in hand, snapping pictures of icicles dangling from rooftops and the frozen pond glimmering under the weak sun. A small group of guests passed me on their way back from the ski lift, laughing snowflakes clinging to their hats. One of them, a woman about my age, smiled and said, "You here alone?" "Yeah," I answered without hesitation. "And I'm good with that." She grinned. "Good for you. Sometimes that's the best company." We wished each other Merry Christmas and went our separate ways. I tucked my hands into my coat pockets and kept walking until my breath came out in soft clouds. When I returned to my room, the light was already fading into dusk. The fire crackled, filling the space with a low hum. I poured myself a glass of wine from the minibar and sank into the armchair again. The stillness was addictive. The dogs back home were fine. The house was fine. Everything was fine. except the people who had assumed I'd be there holding it all together. That thought almost made me laugh. When I finally glanced at my phone on the nightstand, the screen lit up with a flood of missed calls. 15 at first, then, as I watched it, jumped to 25. Mom, Eleanor, Hannah. A couple of unknown numbers, probably from my cousins. The pattern was always the same. Need then panic, and I was always the one who answered. Not this time. The screen flashed again with Mom's name. I let it ring until it stopped. Then I picked up the phone, flipped it face down on the table, and took a slow sip of wine. The glass was cool in my hand, the taste sharp and sweet at the same time. Outside, the wind picked up, carrying a faint howl through the mountain pass. I leaned back and closed my eyes, the heat from the fire pressing against my skin. For the first time, the word alone didn't sound like a punishment. Somewhere between this flicker of the flames and the quiet hum of the wind, I caught myself smiling. There are sounds worth hearing. Laughter, music, waves, wind, and then there are sounds that stop deserving your attention. The phone vibrated again on the table, once, twice, 3 times. I didn't move. I reached instead for the remote, turned on a jazz playlist, and let the piano fill the room. The melody moved slow and soft, like someone breathing steadily after years of holding it in. I looked out the window one more time, the snow glowing under the moonlight, the mountains fading into shadows. There were no car horns, no arguments, no guilt-filled conversations, disguised as love. Just silence. Full deep, and mine. I whispered into the stillness. Some sounds are only meant for people who stay. I lifted the glass again, watching the firelight catch its edge. I don't stay anymore. Snow fell thick and heavy over the highway as my mother's SUV crawled north toward the mountains. Inside the car, the heater hummed the faint strains of Silent Night whispering through the radio. Neither she nor Eleanor spoke. The road ahead was a blur of white. Mom's hands tightened around the steering wheel. We should have left earlier, she muttered more to herself than to Eleanor. Eleanor glanced at her phone, scrolling through photos of the cabin. Hannah texted, "They're already there. Fireplace lit, hot chocolate ready." Mom forced a smile, but her eyes stayed on the road. Good. The silence settled again, thick and uncomfortable. The song on the radio faded, replaced by static. Then her phone buzzed on the dashboard. A notification popped up from the home security app, flashing red. Pipe burst detected. Possible water leak. Mom's breath hitched. Oh no. No. What is it? Eleanor asked, leaning closer. The house, Mom said, her voice trembling. The water line. God, it's freezing today. It must have burst. Mom slowed down. But Mom was already jerking the wheel into a hard U-turn, the tires skidding briefly before gripping the icy pavement again. We have to go back. They didn't speak the rest of the drive. The only sounds were the rumble of the engine and the crackle of snow against the windshield. By the time they pulled into the driveway, water was already spilling from beneath the garage door, steaming in the cold air. Inside, chaos waited for them. The living room floor was a shallow lake tree, lights flickering as the water crept higher. Harper and Finn barked frantically, their paws splashing through the mess. The steady hiss of running water echoed from the kitchen. Oh my God! Eleanor gasped, lifting a soaked rug. This is bad. This is really bad. Mom was already fumbling for her phone. Olivia, she knows what to do. She'll know how to. She dialed, pressing the phone to her ear. It rang once, twice, 3 times. Straight to voicemail. Olivia, where are you? Mom's voice cracked. The house is flooding. The dogs. Please call me back. She hung up and tried again. Still nothing. Why isn't she answering? Eleanor shouted, frustration cutting through her fear. She's supposed to be here. You said she'd be here. I don't know. Mom's voice rose, tears welling in her eyes. I told her to come by early. I trusted her. Across the street, Nancy Moore stood on her porch, bundled in her coat, phone in hand. She recorded the scene quietly, shaking her head. I told her not to let them push her around. Nancy murmured under her breath, pressing record anyway. But she's going to want proof of this, Mrs. Grant, she called out. Do you need help? Mom turned, soaked and furious. No, I just need my daughter to answer her damn phone. Nancy frowned but said nothing more. She stayed where she was filming as Eleanor ran for towels, as my mother waded through water to shut off the main valve. By the time the flow stopped, the first floor was destroyed, ruined furniture soggy. Presents the sound of dripping echoing through the silence. Mom slumped into a chair. Her hair wet, her gloves heavy with water. Eleanor sat across from her, pale and exhausted. "Do you think she did this on purpose?" Eleanor asked quietly. Mom glared. "Don't you dare! She could have checked the pipes, Mom. She should have been here." Mom didn't answer. Instead, she picked up her phone again and hit redial. In Aspen, my phone buzzed on the nightstand beside the massage table, lighting up the darkened spa room. I didn't move. The air smelled like cedar and lavender. Soft music playing somewhere in the background. The masseuse whispered, "You can relax your shoulders now." I exhaled slowly, letting her words wash over me. I had left my phone on vibrate only out of habit, not out of care. The screen kept flashing. Mom, then Eleanor, then Mom again. If I answered, they'd tell me everything was my fault. They'd cry, maybe yell, and somehow I'd be the one apologizing. That's how it always went. But if I didn't answer, they'd finally have to face themselves, face what happens when the one person they take for granted disappears. I turned my head to the side, watching the candlelight flicker against the wall. If I picked up, the story would go the same way it always did. If I didn't, maybe it would finally change. When the session ended, I slipped into my robe hair slightly damp from the steam room. The phone was still vibrating softly, screen flashing again and again. I placed it face down on the table. Later that night, I walked into the resort's lounge. A jazz trio played near the fireplace, and the smell of wine and citrus filled the air. I ordered a glass of red and took a seat at the bar facing the window. Outside, the snow glowed blue under the moonlight. The television above the bar flickered between local channels until a newscaster's voice cut through the music. In Denver tonight, a family's holiday took a turn for the worse after a pipe burst flooded their home. Officials say freezing temperatures likely caused the damage while the owners were away for the holidays. The footage showed my parents' house, the front porch lights still blinking, water pooling on the lawn. "That's a shame," the bartender said, shaking his head. "Always happens right before Christmas." "Yeah," I said quietly. Eyes on the screen. "It does," the reporter continued. "Neighbors say no one was home when the pipe burst. 2 dogs were rescued by a neighbor and are safe. Nancy." I felt a strange mix of relief and something else, something that might have been guilt, but lighter, thinner. A necessary kind of guilt. I turned away from the screen and looked at the fire crackling across the room. Mom was probably panicking. Eleanor was probably furious. The entire family chat thread was probably on fire. But none of it touched me here. The piano picked up again, soft and low, and I took a slow sip of wine. "Merry Christmas, Mom," I said under my breath. The words didn't carry bitterness anymore. They just sounded like truth spoken out loud for the first time. Outside, the snow kept falling, and for once, I didn't feel sorry for choosing peace over duty. The lobby was glowing that night, wrapped in gold and green light. The staff at Aspen Ridge had transformed the space into something out of a Christmas card. Garlands draped over the fireplace, jazz softly weaving through the hum of conversation. Guests laughed over glasses of wine, couples clinked champagne flutes, and outside the windows, snow fell in slow, steady spirals. I sat at the far end of the bar, my dress simple, dark blue, the kind of thing I hadn't worn in years except for work functions. The bartender poured me another glass of Merlot without asking. "You here with anyone?" he asked, casually polishing a glass. "No," I said, smiling faintly. "Just me." He nodded, the kind of polite nod you give someone who clearly prefers to be left alone. I liked that about him. The warmth of the fire reached even here, and for once I let myself simply exist. No phone, no responsibilities, no moths waiting to be managed. Then a voice behind me cut through the sound of the piano. Olivia Grant. I turned hard, pausing for a moment before memory caught up. Standing there, snow still melting in his hair, was Liam Ross. His smile was softer than I remembered, but the same. We'd gone to college together, communications major, photojournalism minor. He'd been the kind of person who carried a camera everywhere and never seemed to belong to any one place. "Liam," I said, surprised enough to laugh. "What are the odds?" He grinned. Apparently better than I thought. I almost didn't recognize you. You look different. Peaceful, maybe? That's a first, I said, raising my glass. What brings you to Aspen? He took the stool beside me. Work. I'm doing a winter feature for a travel magazine. Shots of small-town holiday life. The kind of thing people look at and think happiness can be booked online. I smiled at that. You always did have a way of seeing through the pretty pictures. And you, he said, leaning his elbows on the bar, were always the one who looked like you had everything figured out. Trust me, I said, swirling my wine that was good lighting and a forced smile. He laughed, low and warm. Then you've learned to let it go. I'm working on it. We talked for a while, about the years that had slipped past the people we'd lost touch with, the small things that still felt too big. He told me about quitting his job at a news outlet 2 years ago to freelance. I thought freedom would be loud, he said. Turns out it's quiet, sometimes uncomfortably so. I looked down at my glass. I used to be afraid of quiet. Now I crave it. Guess we both grew up, he said softly. After a while, he asked if I wanted to take a walk before the next snow rolled in. I nodded, grabbed my coat, and followed him outside. The world was silver and blue under the moonlight. The snow crunched beneath our boots as we walked the narrow path circling the resort. The air smelled clean, sharp. Above us, the stars burned through a thin veil of cloud. We didn't talk much at first. There was no need. The quiet had a rhythm of its own. Then he said, "You know, back in college, everyone thought you were the strong one." I let out a breath that was half laughter, half disbelief. Everyone thought wrong. No, he said, I think you just thought strength meant never falling apart in public. Maybe you're stronger now because you don't need to prove it. His words hung between us, soft and true, in a way that made my throat ache. Maybe I said after a pause, or maybe I just stopped expecting anyone to notice. He smiled. That's still strength. We walked in silence after that, the sound of our boots like a slow metronome. For the first time in a long while, I wasn't thinking about what I should say, or how I should act. The air felt lighter. When we circled back to the resort, he stopped at the entrance. "If you're around tomorrow, come by the gallery downstairs," he said. "They're displaying local photographers. I'd love to show you my work." I said, and I meant it. He looked at me for a moment longer, as if weighing something, then smiled. "Good night, Olivia. Good night, Liam." I watched him walk away until the snow swallowed his outline. Back in my room, the fire still burned low. I slipped off my coat and boots, the heat from the flames brushing against my legs. My phone sat on the nightstand face down where I'd left it. I hesitated, then picked it up. The screen lit up bright blue, flooding my face with its cold glow. 78 missed calls, dozens of messages, all from the same names, Mom, Eleanor Hannah. I stared at the number for a long time, then laughed softly. Not bitterly, just amused at how predictable it all was. They were probably in panic mode by now, angry, frantic, crafting some story about how I'd ruined everything. Maybe they'd even convinced themselves I'd done it to spite them. But the truth was simpler. I was just done being the backup plan. I powered off the phone. The screen went black, my reflection disappearing into it. Outside, the wind picked up again, carrying snow against the window like a whisper. I stepped out onto the balcony, the cold biting at my skin, and looked out over the valley. The mountains stretched endlessly under the stars, still and eternal. Somewhere, a church bell rang midnight. Silence pressed in, vast and beautiful. I closed my eyes and let it sink into me. The kind of silence that felt like starting over. For years, I'd filled the quiet with apologies, explanations, promises. I didn't owe. Now I didn't have to say anything at all. The snow thickened, the wind curled through the trees, and for the first time in my life, I felt louder in silence than I ever had in words. I whispered to no one. Silence has never sounded this loud. Christmas morning dawned pale and quiet, the kind of morning that looked peaceful from a distance, but carried a sharp edge underneath. In Denver, my mother stood on the front step of my apartment building, her gloved hand pounding on the door so hard it shook the frame. "Olivia!" She shouted, her breath clouding the air. "Open this door right now." Nothing. No footsteps, no sound from inside. Just the muffled hum of a radiator somewhere in the building. Across the street, Nancy Moore stepped out of her house in her long gray coat, holding a cup of coffee. "She's not there," Nancy said calmly. Mom turned face, flushed from the cold and frustration. "You know where she is?" "I don't," Nancy replied, walking closer. And even if I did, it's none of your business. Olivia's an adult. She doesn't owe you an explanation. She was supposed to take care of my house." Mom's voice cracked equal parts anger and panic. "Now everything's ruined. Water everywhere, the ceiling collapsing, the insurance refusing to pay. She's responsible for this." Nancy's eyes narrowed. "No, she's not. You left that house in her name without asking, and you assumed she'd obey. I have video of the day you left. She never agreed to anything." Mom froze, the fury on her face faltering for a second. "Video?" "Yep," Nancy said, taking a sip from her cup. "And since you're threatening her, I've already forwarded it to someone who knows what to do with it." At that same moment, inside my parents' waterlogged home, Eleanor was pacing the living room floor, phone pressed to her ear. Her boots splashed through puddles that used to be carpet. "You don't understand," she pleaded. "My mother's house flooded while we were gone. We have coverage for burst pipes." The voice on the other end, patient but firm, said, "Ma'am, our records show no one was home to maintain the thermostat. Without heat, the water line froze." "That voids coverage. But my sister—" Eleanor started, her voice rising. Then she stopped, realizing how small that word sounded. She was supposed to." The agent cut her off gently. "I'm sorry, ma'am. There's nothing we can do." The line went dead. Eleanor sank onto the bottom step of the staircase, wiping her face with a wet sleeve. "It's gone," she whispered. "The claim's gone." In the kitchen, my mother stood surrounded by toppled decorations and ruined furniture. Her phone buzzing with new notifications. She opened an email from an unfamiliar sender. Subject: legal clarification regarding the Grant residence. The message was short. "Dear Mrs. Grant, as legal counsel for Ms. Olivia Grant, I am confirming that she holds no contractual or verbal responsibility for maintenance or supervision of your property. Ownership and liability remain solely with you. Respectfully, Ethan Ross, attorney at law." Mom's hands trembled as she read it twice, 3 times, each word hammering harder than the one before. The phone slipped from her fingers and landed in a puddle on the floor. Back in Aspen, I sat in a small cafe across from the resort, a cup of coffee warming my hands. A soft version of "Have Yourself a Merry Little Christmas" played from the corner speaker. The cafe was nearly empty, just a couple by the window, and an old man reading a newspaper. The world outside was white and untouched, the snow still falling gently over the trees. I opened my laptop. There it was, an email from Ethan. Subject: all clear. The body of the message read, "Everything's been handled. They can't touch you. Enjoy your trip." I leaned back in my chair and let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. For the first time in my life, I wasn't bracing for the next accusation, the next emotional ambush disguised as family concern. I didn't have to explain, defend, or apologize. For the first time, the truth stood on its own without me carrying it. The waitress came by smiling. "Another coffee." "Please." I said, my voice softer than I meant it to be. She refilled the cup, and I thanked her. The window beside me had started to fog from the heat inside, and with my fingertip, I drew a small line through the condensation, revealing the snowy street beyond. A family of 4 walked past, the kids dragging a sled, their laughter carrying through the glass. I watched them go, not with envy, but with something closer to acceptance. Not every family was meant to hold the same shape forever. My laptop chimed again. A notification from the local news site. Out of habit, I clicked it. Denver home floods. Amid deep freeze. Insurance denies claim. The photo was unmistakable. My parents' house. Lights flickering through shattered windows, water streaking down the steps. The caption read, "Neighbors report the owners were away on holiday when a pipe burst." The irony was almost cinematic. I closed the tab, folded my laptop, and stared into my coffee. The reflection of the overhead lights shimmered in the dark surface, warm and still. I thought about my mother's voice. Sharp, certain, always in control. I imagined her now sitting in that wet, cold house, realizing control had slipped through her fingers like water. It wasn't revenge, not really. I hadn't done a thing. The world had simply caught up. There's a strange calm that comes when you stop needing to be right, when you finally let the truth do the talking. I sipped the coffee, its bitterness grounding me. Outside, the snowfall thickened, covering every trace of footsteps on the street. Somewhere I hoped Harper and Finn were safe and warm with Nancy. I knew they would be. She'd never let anyone go cold. I looked out the window one last time before heading back to the resort. The sky was low, heavy with snow, but beautiful in that quiet way winter can be when no one's trying to fill the silence. Karma doesn't always arrive with thunder. Sometimes it just drips steadily through the ceiling until you're forced to look up. By the time I left the cafe, the song had changed to "The First Noel," and the bells outside rang out across the valley. I pulled my coat tighter, my breath white against the air, and whispered into the wind, "Merry Christmas, Mom." It wasn't anger this time, just truth, clean, unadorned, and final. The morning light spilled through the fog over aspen soft and gold, catching the edges of the frosted window in my room. December 26th. The world outside was quiet again. No carolers, no rushing families, just the slow hum of a town waking up after too much celebration. I sat at the small desk near the balcony, typing an email to my team back at Everbright Travel, half thinking I'd get a few out-of-office replies. Before I could hit send, a new message appeared at the top of my inbox. Subject, "Congratulations, Olivia. Record year." I opened it. Everbright just hit its highest holiday revenue in company history. We're promoting you to creative director, effective immediately. Your leadership made this possible. Enjoy your well-earned break. For a second, I just stared at the screen. Then I laughed quietly, the kind that starts small and spreads before you can stop it. Mom used to tell me I thought too much about myself. Maybe she was right. And maybe that was the best thing I'd ever learned to do. I leaned back, letting the sunlight warm my face, and closed my eyes. A soft knock broke the silence. When I opened the door, Catherine Ross stood there holding a steaming cup of coffee in both hands. "Morning," she said with her usual calm smile. "Thought you might like a refill." "Thank you," I said, taking the cup. The smell of roasted beans mixed with cinnamon filled the air. "We're hosting a winter cooking class downstairs," she added. "You should join us. It's fun, and no one cares if you burn the soup." I smiled. "After all these years, I think I deserve to learn how to cook for myself." Catherine laughed. "That's the spirit." She gave a small wave and disappeared down the hall. I sat back at the desk, the coffee warming my palms. The snow outside had started to glitter under the late morning sun, the mountain peaks sharp and bright. Peace felt different now, less like absence and more like presence. A few hours later, the sound of tires crunching snow pulled me to the window. Down in the parking lot, a familiar old Jeep had just stopped. When the door opened, Nancy Moore stepped out bundled in her thick coat and jumping from the back seat. Baxter and Luna. I was already halfway to the lobby before I realized I hadn't even grabbed my coat. The cold air hit me the second I stepped outside, but I didn't care. Nancy grinned when she saw me. "You didn't think I'd let these two spend Christmas week in a kennel, did you? The insurance company's paying for their temporary relocation? I figured they'd rather relocate to you." The dogs barked and bounded toward me, tails wagging so hard they nearly knocked me off balance. I dropped to my knees, laughing as they covered my face with snow and fur. "Thank you, Nancy," I said, breathless. "You have no idea how much this means." "I think I do," she said softly. "You deserve good company. Besides, the mountains suit them." I looked at the two of them, their noses white with frost. "They're loyal," I said, "even when other people aren't." Nancy squeezed my shoulder. "That's because they know where home really is." When she left, I brought the dogs up to my room. They explored every corner like it was a new adventure, tails never stopping. Watching them, something warm settled in my chest. Something like belonging, but on my own terms. Later that evening, the resort was quieter than before. The Christmas lights still glowed, but the music had faded to a low hum. I sat in the lounge by the fire with Baxter and Luna sleeping at my feet. Liam appeared, camera slung over his shoulder, cheeks pink from the cold. "Thought I might find you here," he said, sitting across from me. "Did you get the shots you wanted?" I asked. He nodded, pulling something from his jacket pocket. A printed photograph, glossy, and framed at the edges. "I developed this in town this morning. It's from the night of the snowfall." He handed it to me. It was a photo of me standing on the balcony 2 nights ago, the snow falling around me like static, the faint light of the resort haloing my outline. I barely recognized myself. Calm, unforced, free. "You look peaceful," he said. I studied the image. "That's because I stopped trying to make everyone else happy." He smiled, a quiet kind of admiration in his eyes. "That's rare. Hold on to it." We sat there for a while, not saying much, just listening to the fire crackle. Outside, the snow had started again, slow and steady. After he left, I climbed the stairs to my room, Baxter and Luna padding beside me. Inside, I turned on the bedside lamp and changed into my sweater. My phone sat on the table, the screen dark. For a long moment, I considered leaving it that way. Then curiosity got the better of me. I pressed the button. A single new message glowed on the screen. From Mom. "Maybe next year you should come with us." I stared at it, waiting for something. An apology, a sense of peace, a tug of emotion. But there was none. Just the same pattern, the same tone, the same expectation that I'd be the one to make things right again. I deleted the message. Baxter lifted his head, watching me. I smiled, scratched behind his ear, and whispered, "We're okay, buddy. We're exactly where we're supposed to be." He sighed and rested his head back on his paws. Luna curled against my feet. I picked up the photo Liam had given me, leaned it against the lamp, and sat down beside the dogs on the floor. The firelight flickered across the room, warm and quiet. For the first time, I didn't feel like I was waiting for anyone's approval. I didn't feel guilty for choosing peace. Outside, the snow kept falling over Aspen, erasing footprints, softening everything it touched. I looked down at my dogs, then out at the white glow beyond the window, and smiled. Sometimes the best gifts don't come wrapped. Sometimes they just arrive late, but exactly on time. The day faded slow and quiet over Aspen, the light turning the snow outside to shades of gold and pink. I sat by the window with a blanket around my shoulders. Baxter and Luna curled up beside me, their bodies warm against my legs. The fireplace crackled softly, filling the room with the smell of burning cedar. No ringing phones, no messages, no reminders that I owed anyone an explanation. Outside, the snow kept falling, steady, endless cleansing. The mountains looked weightless under it, as if the whole world had taken one deep breath and finally exhaled. For years, I thought Christmas was about showing up where people needed me most, being useful, being available, being the one who held everything together. Now I knew better. Christmas was about showing up where I could finally be myself. I reached for my mug of tea, its warmth fading against the chill that crept in through the window panes. Across the valley, the lights from the resort glowed faintly through the fog, distant but beautiful. I could still hear faint laughter from the lobby, the soft murmur of lives going on, without me having to manage them. I stood and pushed the door open to the balcony. The wind rushed in sharp and cold, brushing strands of hair across my face. Snowflakes landed in my hair, melted instantly. Baxter barked once, then twice, chasing Luna across the small space, their paws sliding on the icy boards. I laughed, a sound I hadn't heard from myself in a long time. Light, unforced, real. The mountains stretched endlessly in front of me, fading into the horizon. The sunset hit the peaks with a final burst of orange before sinking into twilight. I felt the cold seep into my skin, but it didn't bother me. It felt honest. I whispered into the air. "This is it. This is what peace feels like." Behind me, the fire popped in the hearth, and I turned back inside. I sat on the rug, the dogs settling next to me again, one on each side like bookends. The warmth of the room wrapped around us, the only sound the soft hiss of the logs, and the wind pressing gently against the windows. Somewhere in the distance, church bells rang. A slow, steady rhythm marking the last hours of Christmas Day. I thought of Denver, of the house I grew up in. For the first time, I didn't feel the pull of it. The walls, the decorations, the chaos. It all belonged to another version of me, one that had spent too long trying to prove she was enough. That version had finally gone quiet. I closed my eyes and saw flashes. My mother standing in her dark house, the silence she used to control now pressing back against her. Nancy's face steady and kind. Liam's photo a reflection of peace I hadn't known I carried. I didn't feel triumph, just clarity. The kind that comes when you stop running towards something that was never meant for you. Later that evening, I checked my email one last time. There was a message from Nancy, short and sweet with an attached photo. It was of me on the balcony that morning, Baxter and Luna playing in the snow behind me. Her caption read, "Looks like she found peace." I smiled. She was right. I hit reply. "Thank you for helping me find it." Before closing the laptop, I sent one more message. This one to Ethan, my lawyer and old friend. "Everything's fine here. You can stop worrying. I think I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." He replied within minutes. "Glad to hear it. You finally sound like yourself." I didn't write back. There was nothing else to say. I poured the last of my wine, took it to the couch, and watched the fire burn lower. The flames had softened to embers glowing steady like a heartbeat. Baxter's tail flicked once against my leg, and Luna sighed in her sleep. Outside, the snowfall thickened, blurring the edges of the world. I thought about the woman I used to be. The one who said yes to everything, who mistook exhaustion for love. She would have been checking her phone right now, waiting for someone to say thank you for proof she mattered. This woman, me now, didn't need that. I leaned back, my eyes heavy, the sound of the wind and the dogs breathing in sync. They thought I stayed behind to watch their house, but really, I'd been learning how to watch over myself. I smiled, a quiet one that came from somewhere deep and certain. I closed my eyes and let the warmth of the room pull me under. Peace, I realized, wasn't given. It was chosen. Every day, in every silence, you refused to fill with apology. And this year, that was the gift I gave myself. If you've ever chosen peace over pleasing others, tell me your story. I think the world needs to hear more of those.